They're on or off, but here we are. Welcome to Let It Gold, everybody. My name is Daniel Hill, the founder of Alchemical Records, and with me tonight is the Alchemical Records team. Let me actually read the introduction that I wrote because I want to introduce everybody. We're here for another exciting episode of Lead into Gold, where we're discussing industry news and introduce audiences to the issues impacting the local and international music industries and creative professionals around the world. This web series provides a means for indie artists to learn more about the many areas that make up the creative scene, as well as a platform for guests to promote their causes. We don't have any guests tonight, so we're going to promote our causes tonight. We may never get the chance again. Who knows? With us, of course, on today's call, Maura Marcelino, Cynthia Gross, Charlie Maybe, Dylan Keegan, and Emma Downs. Thank you all for being on tonight's call. I come across articles, like I know nobody else browses the internet, but I do. And when I do, I come across these things, and I often wonder, like, am I the only person that is actually interested in this subject? And then come to find out, I send it to like one or two people because I usually don't repost things on like a massive quantity. And there's some interest, some general buzz, or some conversations to get started. I have tons of questions that I'd like to ask all of you, and I'd like to have you help me work through these like very difficult lines of questions that I've come up with. In June of 2022, the Recording Academy released updated rules and guidelines for the 2023 Grammy Awards. I'm quoting from the Grammy website: 5 new Grammy Awards categories to be awarded at the 2023 Grammys, officially known as the 65th Grammy Awards, including the newly added Songwriter of the Year, Non-Classical, Best Score Soundtrack for Video Games, and other interactive media categories. Among other new categories and changes, additionally, a new Special Merit Award will be given out for Best Song for Social Change. Other amendments include changes to the Grammy Awards and entry voting processes and more. So am I the only person first that came across this? Is everybody hearing this for the first time? No? Okay. So I want to dig into a couple of like these categories that have been introduced. And I know that when I'm looking at them, I wonder, the first reason is like, why are there new categories at all? It's the 65th annual Grammy Awards, right? You feel like they'd come up with all of the awards by now, right? But it's funny that, of course, it's an evolving thing. The first topic is Songwriter of the Year, Non-Classical. So I find this really interesting in terms of the verbiage that we're using, that a Songwriter of the Year Classical would typically be referred to as a composer, right? Am I missing something in the terms that we would use? Is there a difference between like a classical songwriter versus a classical composer?
I don't know. That's an interesting question because I think because I do think that there are some like traditional styles of music. Like my brain immediately goes to like Celtic music for some reason, which could, in a sense, be considered classical in some ways. But because it's a little bit more like folk oriented, I think some of those are less thought of as compositions and more as songs. So like I wonder if in a situation like that, like I wonder if there's like a layer to it there. You know what I mean? That it's not necessarily about or maybe it's not necessarily just the designation of like classical, but that like there's something about like the folk roots, and I say folk roots in sort of like a very broad, generic way. Um, I don't know. I don't know if anyone has thoughts about that, but that's sort of where my brain goes first.
Anyone else? My brain kind of goes back to wondering like maybe why folk or why Celtic music would be considered folk music, even as opposed to like world music, right? Um, how far back does music have to go for it to be world music versus folk music? Because folk music is supposed to be, very traditional lineages that you can kind of trace through the roots of the music, right? Like Americana today would be a result of folk music and its like evolution. Um, so, and that's also like one of the new categories. But before we bounce onto that, um, I don't know if I don't know if I would feel the same about like folk music as being non-classical. Wouldn't folk Doesn't folk music have its own category inside of the Grammy? So like why wouldn't like your in your example, Charlie, wouldn't that already be, kind of tucked under that umbrella? Um, I'm wondering, like if you're a songwriter, like songwriter of the year, that's a very broad category for a tons of genres, right? And versus non-classical. I'm not necessarily sure why this particular like delineation. Um, let's see if I can find some context here. This looks like the other thing. So the Grammy website says that there is a reason here. The impact of so Susan Storr, managing director, songwriting and composers wing. With the launch of the songwriters and composers wing, we want to show our dedication to true craft writers. It was the perfect time with the launch of the wing to initiate it. It has a longer story, but it really did help having the wing behind a stand on it. Um, do you think that it has something to do with the way that they're, because I this looks like it's trying to say that it's built around like the songwriters working independently. Maura, you'd mentioned this kind of in the green room time, being a songwriter and not really writing to be a performer. That seems to be one of the ways that this has been brought up. But I never really felt like the Songwriter of the Year award was dedicated to just uh, to just being a performer who was a songwriter in the first place. Um,
When they're referring to songwriters here, is this still an entirely instrumental category, or does this include people who utilize like lyrics in their compositions or their songwriting? Does that have any pertinence here?
I mean, I would imagine that this could be lyrical or non-lyrical, uh, but I imagine for the most part it's going to be a lyrical composition, um, not necessarily, uh, something that would be recognized as pop or popular even, but just something with lyrics set to a melody. Um, it does say that artists and producers can win the award, but it seems like the thresholds are different. So maybe it's a way of separating between, say, an electronic music producer uh, versus a songwriter that's part of the, like the hierarchy, like working with a publishing company or working with artists to place music with those artists. Let's see, I have not peeked at our Twitch chat. Oh, so we're on live on Twitch. We're still very new there. Let's see, nobody on our YouTube. What about you, Mara? You see anybody chatting it up in our Facebook yet? Awesome. For science. Um, all right, so let's move on to the next category, best alternative music performance. Track and single category that recognizes the best recordings in an alternative performance by a solo artist, collaborating artists, established duo, or established group. So my first thoughts here are uh, alternative music's been around a long time. Why did it take this long to, for the Grammys to kind of come up with this category? I also think that it's interesting to think of artists that today we would consider alternative who maybe only had what like the rock category to be able to or adult contemporary category maybe to compete with earlier. Um, I'm wondering, does this mean like that, like history could be changed if we went back 15 years and had the alternative rock category or the alternative category there, would it change who made it into the upcoming festival circuits and the whole bit? Do a little time warp there. Can you think of any artists that might like be taking advantage of this category now that didn't have a chance to take advantage of that category before?
I feel like I'm actually thinking of it in like a the opposite direction because like I'm like there's an album that came out last year by Halsey, the oh, I forget what it was called. Um, if I can't
Yeah.
have love, I want power.
Yeah.
Um, and that was an interesting album because it like for someone who was so like cemented in like the pop stardom, you know what I mean? To make an album with Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross really took her into that like alternative world. Um, and so I'm almost thinking about it in sort of like reverse, like people who like got sort of sucked into the pop star like world who maybe would have made different choices if alternative was more of a viable award or sort of like category at the time that they were making music. But that might be a very specific example. But I'm curious, sort of, yeah, on that end, like would it have changed some of the bigger people who have bigger pop stars? Like would they have chosen like different um, composition styles or songwriting styles that would have like moved them into a different category if they weren't vying for pop music specifically.
The evolution of pop is kind of funny. I mean, I think of boy bands being the forefront of what we think of as our pop sound, and then I think a lot of other genres started to kind of lean in on some of those production values. But I still think, when Taylor Swift made the switch, to being a pop artist, that's really when things kind of got out of hand. Um, but in the I do think that alternative artists exist. I mean, I think Yellow Tie Guy, for example, sits really squarely inside of the alternative space. Like, it wouldn't be fair to call us um, rock, because if you listen to an album, you're going to hear those bluegrass, country, Americana influences in one song, and then you're going to hear, hard rock, heavy metal influences in another song. But overall, like, they they're just like, it's all very song driven stuff. So using alternative, is a way of being broader, of feeling like you're able to place a broader category on your music, and making it more receptive to different audiences versus a rock category.
Right. And I like how MTV, they had it with they in the 90s, but then they didn't bring it back until 2020. They stopped in 1999 and then brought it back in 2020.
Because you think that that's also part of that like alternative leaning where it kind of fits into multiple categories.
Right. And how people, I don't want to say like the resurgence of pop punk and stuff like that, because I truly believe that pop punk never really died. But you have artists like in the alternative category, like you have Bleachers or MGK or even Imagine Dragons, some of them consider alternative.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider Imagine Dragons rock, even though there is
Right.
certainly elements of rock in there, and I consider them pop because they're popular. Like, they did go into the mainstream, so I think that at some point they become, iconographic with what pop sound like. But I think that what attracts most listeners is that variety of, like, you're listening to a song and then you're hearing the same feel by that artist, but you're not getting an exact duplication of the song preceding it.
Right. I think 21 Pilots, I know they won Grammys, but I think maybe they could have gotten one sooner.
Can you think of any DMV artists that should be applying for the alternative category now that it's available?
Sub Radio.
Sub Radio.
I love a Sub Radio. They're maybe like pop alternative, but even and Ben DeHaan.
So maybe applying for multiple categories. I think
Right.
you. I just read on the other page you might be able to what submit up to 9 if I'm remembering correctly.
You can set up
Maybe.
to 9 for the songwriting one, but yeah, up to 9.
So is there a limit on the cap of how many you can submit to individual? Like if I wanted to try to get nominated for 12, like 12 different genres, could I try to do that with the same single? Something you can ask it at uh, your next Grammy U meeting.
I don't know. You had that one lady at that one state fair who literally won every baking contest in the entire fair. So I'm gonna say yes, that it should be legal, but it has to be like a real bop. You know what I mean? It has to like I don't know. There definitely have to be rules in place, but I'm open to the idea of something just like sweeping because of how like because of how broad alternative music has become. Like I think that reach can be really grand if we let it.
If we let it, that's a powerful phrase. Anybody else DMV artists that you think ought to make it into the alternative Grammy nominations?
I really like the band Bittersweet or Pretty Bitter. Sorry, not Bittersweet. Pretty Bitter. They used to be based in the DMV, but they recently had a name change to Pretty Bitter, and I would put them on the list for a really solid alternative band from the DMV.
I think that is a really good pick. There's there's an artist that their name escapes me. I can't think of it right now, but I'll come back to it, and later on in the call I'll just remind bring it on back. I can think of everything about the track actually. Um, Gosh, again, I'll come back to it. I actually do have somebody in mind for the next category, which is Americana. Should come as no surprise if you're living in the DMV that Americana is kind of a big deal around here. A track and single category that recognizes artistic excellence in an Americana performance by a solo artist, collaborating artist, established duo, or established group. I think John Tyler Wiley is a great DMV example of an artist that should try to get in there while it's hot. Justin Trawick probably would be a good fit there. He also borderlines, I think, just because of his familiarity with pop music and the way that he's able to kind of perform them in his own style. I think that also opens him up into kind of some pop spaces. Anybody else? DMV artists in the Americana category?
Eli?
Eli Lev could probably swing in the Americana category. I think if it was more band driven, I think it would be easier to kind of get that feel. I think he's probably more associated as a singer songwriter. Maybe you could put him in. I mean, there's no reason why Eli Lev isn't a pop artist in the Taylor Swift version of things to me. Like from her country Americana influence days, like he's as much on level with that. Now, if he converts completely to pop music, like I'm just going to lose my mind. I won't know what to do with myself. So Eli Lev could probably swing. Yeah.
What about, well, he's kind of associated with us. Matt Tarka, could he be kind of maybe someone, he's on the fringes? I feel like he could, some of his music could fit there.
I think his music could fit into an Americana category, but I think it might not. There's certain elements of Americana, like upright bass, maybe like the use of a lap steel guitar, things like that are kind of from the country bluegrass influences that I don't hear very often in Matt's music. He may also, again, be better in the singer-songwriter category, but also could be alternative. When he's on the tracks, it sounds like we've got, a full band sound, but his topics are very different. They don't necessarily feel, or they're very broad. They're very diverse in just their topic matter, and also in his singing style. I don't typically think of it as being. It is more Pennsylvania accent than like Western Virginia. So I'm not sure. I think that's where it's so tough, like to try to place, like, or even why I feel so strongly about trying to simplify things rather than to expanding in genre. Like, I think part of our misconceptions are like really only one person should win this award. When realistically speaking, when we're trying to like honor people who are doing something inside of their time, maybe it's safer to honor more artists with the same award, and maybe try to keep it simpler, if that makes sense. Because at some point, like, it'd be just easier to, you know, I don't know, to not have 12 different versions of the same thing, or like subgenres of metal. I mean, you can get lost in the subgenres of metal. So it might just be easier to be like, here's 12 metal awards instead of 12 different categories of metal. Any other artist recommendations for DMV's Americana scene? All right. So best score soundtrack for video games and other interactive media. Again, kind of wondering why it's so late to the game in terms of new category. 8 and 16-bit music may have been 8 and 16-bit music, but like, there were some really amazing things done with very limited technology. I think the theme song from Tetris would have won. Just like somebody composing it and putting it into 8-bit world. That person might have had some success. Maybe first step, favorite video game soundtracks. I know mine, so I'm happy to share.
Oh, I definitely have many, but I'm curious to hear yours first, Daniel.
Um, well, I think that Castlevania Symphony of the Night has probably one of the best video game soundtracks ever. And I think that there's certain epics that you can kind of get to by the time you've gotten into categories like Final Fantasy VII, and you're switching 4 PlayStation discs and you're looking at, gosh, like 48 hours of music. Like, somebody there deserves an award, right? Like, so I'm kind of curious because there's some great composers, and then the performers themselves that would normally kind of be associated with being involved with this Grammy winning project. I mean, we're just now getting to the spot where some of these people are going to be recognized. So tell us some of yours, Charlie.
Well, my go-to in terms of like formative years soundtrack was definitely the Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on Sega Genesis, and Sonic 3 and Knuckles, which it now has been confirmed that Michael Jackson did have a hand in composing that music, which is pretty cool. But it's also caused a huge debacle with the release of, oh, what was it? Sonic Mania recently. Apparently they weren't able to get rights for some of the music because of the Michael Jackson estate, and it's causing a lot of drama in the Sonic fandom, which is wild. So that definitely was like sort of like old school, like that old school sort of 8-bit, 16-bit sound that was really formative for me. But then even like looking at the Sonic Adventure series later on, which had Crush 40, and then they started bringing in different bands to write songs for the different character themes and level themes, and there's a lot of really cool world building that happened, especially in that collection of games, Sonic Adventure, Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, that I really liked. So that would be my top pick as sort of like a general like scope of music that I felt like really like informed a lot of my musical upbringing.
Anybody else? Nobody else played video games? What did you do as children?
I'm a longtime fan of the Animal Crossing soundtrack. Perfect study music.
What do you like about it?
The especially the older games. I just I think that the sounds that they used to create the music were really unique. And it's very relaxing. It's almost like my brain noise on daily basis, but in music. So
That's great. I'm working on some infographic sheets for an event that I'm planning for the Smithsonian American Art Museum and MagFest at the end of the month. And I got a chance to do these write-ups about the games. And one of the things that stood out to me was Mario Paint and all of that kind of graphical interface stuff that you could do at the time to compose music. You know, you could see the sounds on screen and you could move them and shift them. And to me, like there's enough information out there now where something like that has contributed to a lot of other kinds of like world building kinds of games or like exploratory kind of games. But I wonder how much something like that even contributed to software that we see today that composers might use, you know, from like Steinbrenner or like Alfred Publisher and things like that, that people are using to like create and compose things. DAWs may have had somebody out there may have been a coder of a DAW one day, like just because they like started playing on Mario Paint. Oh, that's okay, Charlie. We'll just start putting we'll put it a dollar jar, like a swear jar, every time somebody says something they didn't mean to say till later. No, it's no worries. Thank you, Emma. Dylan, did you play video games? Or were you drawing?
I tried desperately to play video games, but my reaction time is pitiful. So I ended up playing a lot of Lego ones, which had a lot of very classic scores to them, which was a lot of fun for me because I got a lot of classics like Star Wars and superheroes from DC and Marvel. Another one I'm a huge fan of is Battle Block Theater, an arcade game that you can play on Xbox, Switch, PlayStation, all of them. And it's super indicative of like the slapstick humor that comes with the entirety of the game. And it feels like the awkward music from SpongeBob where he doesn't know what to do with himself, but it's the entire game mixed with the ad libs of the narrator who is just comedically phenomenal.
That sounds like fun. What's it called again? Battle
Block Theater.
Battle Blog Theater.
Battle Block is one word.
Battle Block. Got it. Cynthia, Maura, if you need any video game recommendations, I'd be happy to help.
I have two brothers, so they were always playing, and I played some. I remember, I think a lot of Sega games like Mortal Kombat, Killer Instinct. I think those soundtracks were kind of in my childhood. So I like a lot of Sega games.
I would play the Tony Hawk game on my cousin's Game Boy, but
Well, I mean, don't even get me started because Tony Hawk's Pro Skater soundtrack was fantastic. But it
Very
wasn't.
formative.
Yeah, it was an incredible soundtrack. That's where I heard about Goldfinger for the first time. Was
oh, yeah.
Tony Hawk's Pro Skater soundtrack.
That was me with System of a Down, one of my favorites.
The first time I heard System of a Down, I didn't like it, but I somehow persevered and listened to it again. It was the album that had Sugar on it. I can't remember. But I remember like maybe 6 months after listening to it for the first time, I was like, huh. And I tried it again and I fell in love with it. Like second time, it was not my like first glance love affair, but the second time around, I just fell in love with that album. So DMV artists that maybe could apply for this category. There's maybe some VGM folks that have been around for a while, like Rare Candy. Master Sword was recently putting up a Kickstarter launch for their new album. Let's see, we've got DJ Supersonic, and there's a couple of folks coming to mind that are like composing things that are VGM-esque.
If Tony Hawk makes another one, Avril Lavigne's making skateboards now, so maybe she'll have a skateboard game. Um, but like Kings of the Wild Things or Keep Your Secrets.
And back to Bed to Han. Got a couple of good skate park stuff. Actually, that's worthwhile. Let me see who's on our skate park list. Let's see. It's getting longer. We've got Bumpin' Uglies. If they make another, if Avril Lavigne makes a skate game. Let's see. We've got Ocean Alley. I don't know if they're local. But anyway, if you're looking for skate park music, we've got a whole playlist dedicated to that. See any other DMV video game based music?
Maybe if it's very kind of atmospheric, flautist, like he does really nice soundscapes almost. So depending on the game, I feel like with like saxophone and kind of all of the layered sounds could be a cool video game soundtrack.
Yeah, I have an old.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say I have an old friend, Matthew Pablo, who was originally from the DMV area. I don't think he's here anymore. I think he's on the West Coast now, but I know that he specializes in composing for video games. So I'm not 100% sure what games he's done, but I know he's starting to build a pretty significant list of both what is it, app games like phone games on your phone, smartphone games, and then you've got some other like actual like console games and stuff like that. It's pretty cool.
That'd be fun. We should definitely, if they're making video games, maybe we should connect with them to look at, or making video game music rather specifically. We could certainly try to figure out a piece on that. The big MagFest events every January. So if we think about maybe including that into some of our coverage, we can all roll down to, National Harbor in January and hand out some copies of the magazine or something, let's see, and maybe if we can facilitate some other arrangements, Cynthia, we can try to match up, the artist you mentioned to some video game companies or something. Maybe they'd like to use their music. I haven't heard it. I'd love to check it out. It made me think of maybe something more exploring based, like Myst. I'm not going to find another good example of that. There's things like that you're playing now. Things that were released like Flower. There's just it's like just ambient music or just like it's not even like meant to drive story or to do anything other than kind of set that more atmospheric mood.
Yeah, we'll have to listen because his vibe would be perfect for that time.
Right. So the next category is best spoken word poetry album. It can be with or without music. So I think it's really interesting that you could have a whole album. Thank you, Dylan. Appreciate it. Thanks for popping in. You could have a whole album of spoken word, and maybe it would be no music, and you'd be competing against a spoken word poet who like puts ambience or some other kind of structure, if you will, to the music. Because it would be possible to maybe switch between spoken word and music and have that be considered, a spoken word project. Where do you think you draw the line?
I don't know where I would draw the line, to be honest. That's a tricky one. And I haven't I have I've gone to a couple of different events where I've gotten to see some slam poetry in particular, but I've never experienced like an album that was specifically like all like spoken like word, or like a full album that was almost like entirely dedicated to being poems. You know what I mean? So I don't know. I'm curious. I'm actually curious about like what the effect would of that is, and how it feels, because I imagine it would be very different from um, your typical like music album. Um, and I think there is a line, you know what I mean? But I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't have enough experience to be able to say like definitively like how I would classify, what goes in which category, if that makes sense.
We recently did like I'd received actually two songs by this artist. Put it into the chats as soon as I can find them again. Let's see. So I'll put these into the chats. So there's an artist listed here who goes by Sia, and it can be kind of difficult. There's a symbol that's used as part of their name that's not common. So it can be sometimes tough, because I think on Spotify they're listed under SIAH, and then there's other places where they're maybe listed having that kind of what is it, custom. I don't know, that kind of custom. I don't even know what to call it. It's not a letter. It's a symbol. Yeah, there you go. It's a symbol. But so we had covered Scene, and if you listen to the whole album that's on, it's See the Sun. I really felt like this was a really strange, like a really strange consideration, because it has tons of spoken word. It has a ton of musical influence, but they're not always like, I didn't really feel like I was trying to be given a verse and a chorus and like following a traditional song format or theme. I felt like I was really like sitting down next to somebody and they're telling me like stories and experiences, and there's also this music, so I'm curious whether or not this would be a good fit for it, for that particular category. But I definitely think you should check it out. I think it would be music that you could like study to, or write your next Alchemical Records article to, when you're not listening to the other artist you're trying to write about.
Yeah. An artist I think about who I feel like is the closest to what I understand as an artist, like towing the line between like a musical album versus like a spoken word album, is Kendrick Lamar. Um, I think his background includes some like actual like poetry, like reciting and slam poetry and stuff like that. But especially on his album To Pimp a Butterfly, which was a couple albums ago now, there are a few tracks on there where it leans so heavily into the lyricism and sort of the dynamic of the delivery of the lyrics in particular, and it's interesting that the music becomes very secondary, at least for me, in that album. Like it feels very like lyrically forward, and I don't necessarily know if that means that it would like count towards something like this. I don't necessarily know that I'd go that far, but I think he is an interesting artist that brings some of that poetry influence in, and manages to like merge it in a way that's really exciting and interesting with each new iteration of his albums. But I hear that in his albums. You know what I mean? I hear the possibility of this being like, this could have been just a collection of like recited like spoken word. Like it could have been just as powerful as that. But then of course the beat making and the production of it like takes hold. So I don't know. I'm still like wrapping my head around the whole thing, but I'm gonna have to listen to that artist that you pulled up, because I'm curious to know if I'm like just limited in my scope. You know what I mean?
Charlie, I'm grappling with it too. But when you were speaking, it made me think of a Philly artist that you've covered, Peachka. Her music too. It feels like it really falls into that, like you said, very lyric. It's very forward with the lyrics, and really mantras, like it feels like it could almost stand on its own, like it feels like it's driven, and maybe it starts there. So she came to mind as well.
I was also wondering, because there's something very experimental about Tyler the Creator, but there's also something about that to me, which when we're talking about like music, like to me, it isn't really so much that Tyler's creating music as much as like an atmosphere for the emotion that he's conveying. So I'm kind of curious. Do you think that this category is potentially a place for somebody that's kind of uh trying to achieve Tyler the Creator's sound, or feels comparable to Tyler the Creator?
Well, I guess it's a thing of like I don't I wouldn't I would almost like be weary of saying that they're trying to like copy someone's sound versus someone's effect. You know what I mean? Because I think that's sort of maybe that's where like the line is drawn. It's not as like it's not about how musically informed, you know what I mean, the track is, but the like potency of the like lyrical effect that really like drives it forward. Which is why, for me, like Kendrick Lamar, like really like yeah, like he grapples with that in a really interesting way, as do a lot of rap artists, just because of how like closely integrated, rap and slam poetry and poetry in general are like they're so intertwined. So I think a lot of rap artists would naturally sort of move towards that that kind of thinking when it comes to planning and creating their tracks, that it often starts from a place of lyrical effect first. Music almost comes second. Maybe. Not always, but maybe as like a starting place for thinking about how to categorize.
I think one of the most talented lyricists, and I'd be interested to see, what they'd come up with if spoken word was just like if that was the game that they were trying to play of like creating a spoken word project. I wonder, Jerome Williams. I wonder what they would do if with just like spoken word being the primary component, because I always feel like there's such a clarity to each track now, with the description of like all the cards. It's like perfect metaphors. Do you know what I mean? Just like it is so precise and so clear what the concept of the song is, and then you're able to hear the metaphor that's in use, and it's perfectly aligned with the theme. And to me, that's what I think of in terms of like powerful lyrics. So I'm not that versed on who in the area that's a DMV artist would be a spoken word poet that should go after this category, but I'd love to try to connect somebody with Jerome Williams if they want to produce a spoken word album together, because it'd be a good deal. All right, we've got one more category, but before I get in, I did say I would find that band that I thought should be maybe fit in that alternative space, and it was Chromanauts. I think one of the most significant pieces of music we shared for them was Legwork, which is probably about a year ago. They had done the music video for Legwork. And I just find that the pulling of these different genres that don't fit really well in other rigid spaces. I wouldn't consider them rock. I wouldn't consider them adult contemporary. I wouldn't consider them hip hop. So I mean, like alternative space is like the right space, because it gives them the versatility to like pull from a lot of different places. Let's see, the last category, best or special merit award edition. I know Maura is queued up with tons of like observations about this award, and I'm very excited. Just thank you, Maura, for contributing to the Girls Rock DC volunteering efforts with Aaron, who couldn't be with us tonight. But I really appreciate all the efforts to try to bring that community effort together. And you are a sustainability coordinator with Jiffy Lube Live, so special causes is something that you're familiar with. Give us the rundown. What do we need to know about this category?
Well, for songs regarding the whole sustainability issue, this song is from, I don't know, maybe 2009, but it really jump-started my sustainable journey. It was for Disney Friends for Change. It was called Send It On. It had the Jonas Brothers, Demi Lovato, Selena Gomez, and Miley Cyrus. And then they did a few more songs for that cause with like Joe Jonas and Demi did one, and then Bridget Mendler did one all about like with oceans and things like that. And I think other artists with like Earth by Lil Dicky, and an artist that I think could really do something. Um he's Australian and he's swimming right now. Like he's focusing on his swimming career, but Cody Simpson, I think he could do like a whole album about the oceans.
What about other kinds of causes? Um, social justice,
Yeah, there are a
change.
lot of like, there's Bob Dylan, Bob Marley. I think they could definitely have won some with their songs.
Um, Otis Redding, Jackson Brown. Um, let me see. Yeah, there's to me, I think we could take the entire decade of the 60s and think about
Could,
all the
yeah.
people that should have won. It's certainly earlier on in the 70s. Um, Obviously, like now there's in substitution of say like the Vietnam War. Obviously, the war in Ukraine is ongoing, and there's a ton of music that people are putting out. People are considering, and putting out music that's themed around that. Um, there's an artist that I hope to be able to get. Um, to be able to put on an interview together with shortly, Elle Mitchell, who um, is releasing an upcoming single about the Uvalde shooting um, at Robb Elementary. And Cynthia, I don't know if I want to say anything, but if you want to, you're welcome to. But I think it's worthwhile to think about um, the a number of artists now also just like writing music from 2 or 3 years ago around the riots and their impact on societies and cultures and neighborhoods, uh, the response to police brutality, and that making that a forefront of the conversation. These are things that artists have always done. I don't think that you can really separate the politics of anything from a musical artist. I think that sometimes maybe it's more clear what people's stance is, but I think that there's a number of artists that have really been part of that conversation and ongoing parts of the conversation that they won't be recognized because their music isn't new. um, it'll be interesting to see what qualifies as being, you know, the song that becomes selected first for this first category. I mean, I think it's such a it's such a big deal. I mean, how do you decide which world problem that somebody sings about is more a bigger world problem than the other one, right? Like there's a huge boots to fill with this category. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what they do with it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Charlie.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I think really for me, like it comes down to like the impact of the song. You know what I mean? Like it's almost like I'm not a big fan of the song "We Are the World." You know what I mean? But the impact of a song like that was humongous. And I think about songs too, like Rage Against the Machine's "Killing in the Name of," which still like has like significant resonance, like sometimes in ways that I don't understand. But like there's something about the impact of the music as opposed to like the actual like selecting it because of the cause it represents. So it's like I don't know. For me, I hope that that's the measurement. You know what I mean? That it's less about you know the content of the song specifically and more about the way that the song like started a conversation or continued or furthered a conversation. You know what I mean? I would imagine for something like that that's a little bit more like socially conscious, that would be like the driving factor.
Anybody else?
With the Jim O'Farrell band, their song
Right.
Criminal.
Yeah, Criminal was specifically about the riots in Richmond and trying to, I think, like trying to come with the, I don't know, the sensible, like, take a look around and look further, look deeper, beyond people and beyond our expectations. Um, and yeah, I think you've got a great example of a band with you know, with a lot of perspective, being in former military. I mean, you look at like battleground situations, and then you look at, riots in the streets, and the thought of just like kind of reimagining that violence again, or like thinking like all of that was the result of the response to police brutality, and that we got there from, from those experiences, and all of the fights that Jim has had in the band to try to preserve justice, to preserve liberty, and to, to defend people's rights, and then to be able to like witness that happening in your backyard. Like it's a really sobering experience. I don't know exactly what that impact the song's impact has had, but I'd love to find out, if there's been any sort of conversation built up around it. Maura, thanks for bringing that up. So a DMV artist with a Grammy agenda. We should clue them in. We should contact all these artists and clue them into their uh, potential Grammy opportunities. Thank you all for joining us on the call today. I think we're about ready to wrap, but I want to make sure that if you have anything else you want to share, that you get a chance to do so. All set? Thank you for joining Alchemical Records on this latest episode of Lead into Gold, exploring the history of the Grammys, the Recording Academy, and the changes you can expect in the 65th Annual Grammy Awards in the spring of 2023. You can find more music news and entertainment articles from all of the fine contributors on our call tonight at alchemicalrecords.com. And you can find us on your favorite social media platform at Alchemical Records, except for Twitter, just at Chemical Records. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. I can't stop it. How do I stop it?